Recently, I had the privilege of attending a conference where Keith Berns, he's one of the owners of Green Cover Food Plots, gave a presentation on how easy it is to use the natural resources. I'm talking about the God-given resources and not adding, synthetic fertilizer, insecticides, fungicides, herbicides to produce very productive food plot crops or even ag crops. It was just one of the best presentations I've ever heard on any subject. So I encourage you to, set back, block out a few minutes and really take this presentation in. You can really save a lot of money by applying these principles, and even maybe more important to some people, produce much more nutritious crops for the wildlife where you hunt. I also encourage you to share a link to this presentation with your friends, because together we can do a lot of good for wildlife and the planet. Sit back and enjoy.
Houston, we have a problem. Back in 1970, when astronaut Jim Lovell said these words, I'm guessing that he didn't really know that would kind of become a saying that we're repeating even today, 50 years later. But Houston, we have a problem has kind of become an iconic saying for when something's gone kind of wrong and we need a fix. We need some help. We're reaching out to help. And Jim Lovell said this because an oxygen tank exploded on Apollo 13 and they needed help, and they radioed back to Houston to get some help. Well, agriculture, we have a problem. Landowners, wildlife managers, we have problems as well, and we need help. If you just look around at the ag economy, we're growing lots of stuff, but we're not making much money. We've got high inputs and high yields, but very low profits. This is a map of fertilizer prices. You know how this is going through the roof, along with most other inputs. This is a chart. The blue represents ag revenue. Look at how much money farmers are bringing in. The green represents how much they're keeping. Or, in the case of the red, how much they're losing. In spite of all that revenue, there's very low profits. Supply chain issues are hitting agriculture just like everywhere else. We have contamination and pollution issues, the hypoxia zone in the Gulf of Mexico, as well as other contamination and pollution issues. We've got resistant weeds. And if you don't know that, you haven't been paying attention and you haven't been out in the fields very much. Crazy weather. I think everybody can relate to all kinds of crazy weather, where it's flooding like this from a couple years ago. This is on the Missouri River, just across on the Iowa side. Flooded so much that the water got into this guy's grain bins, and the corn swelled and it blew his grain bin up. Or, this is where we're at now. We're not worried about floods right now, but man, we've got some drought going on, don't we? I pulled this picture just a couple of weeks ago. And I would guess that a lot of us are in that deep, dark red area of pretty severe drought. Or hail. Had a lot of hail in different places. But of all of these problems, there's one problem that overshadows all of them. And if we can fix this one problem, we're going to solve the other ones. Because the other ones are really more symptoms of this one major problem that we have in agriculture. And that's the problem of soil loss and degradation. This is a picture of Hugh Hammond Bennett. Hugh is kind of the father of the modern conservation movement back in the 30s, the Dust Bowl era. And he's standing out in a field that's been severely eroded by water. And I love this picture because you can just feel the sadness on his face. And if you stand out in a field like this and you're not sad, then there's more problems in that field than just the soil erosion. And it's not just water erosion, we've got wind erosion too. Dust Bowl, huge wind erosion problems. 1935, I'm glad we fixed that and we no longer have to deal with that, right? 2014, and I'm sure we could show pictures every year since. We still have these problems with soil loss, soil degradation. This is from a rest stop in Iowa. We like to make fun of Iowa a lot, but they've got really cool rest stops. They don't have a lot else, right? But they've got really cool rest stops. And this one is showing the soil in Iowa. Iowa has some of the best soil in the world. In 1850, they had 14 inches, and this is average across the entire state of Iowa, not just the best. 14 inches of average topsoil depth. In 1900, they had 11 and a half. In 1950, they had 8 and a half. In 1975, they had 7 inches. In the year 2000, 5 and a half. 2023, I don't know what that would be, but it's probably somewhere around 4. They've lost that much soil, 14 inches down to 5.5 inches in 150 years. Folks, that's a problem. This is written on one of these pillars. Henry Wallace was a Iowan. He served as the Secretary of Agriculture. And he says, to see the rich land being eaten away by erosion, to stand by as continual cultivation on sloping fields wears away the best soil is enough to make a good farmer sick at heart. And that's what I saw in Hugh Hammond Bennett's face. He was sick at heart. In our time, we have seen the process reach an acute stage, and we have at last begun to take to heart the meaning of soil exploitation. That was in 1936. Now, because of Wallace, Hugh Hammond Bennett, and some other real visionaries, there were some good things done. Soil Conservation Service, which later turned into NRCS, was started. The Conservation District movement started. A lot of good things happened, but we still have these issues with us. And not only have we lost a lot of our topsoil to this erosion, wind erosion, water erosion, of the soil that we have left, we've lost more than half of the organic matter. Check this out. These pictures here, the picture on the left and the picture on the right are the same soils, or at least they started out the same. They're right across the fence line from each other, so they're the same soil type. The one on the left has been farmed conventionally for over 100 years. Look at the color. All of the carbon, or most of the carbon, has been lost. The one on the right, same initial soil type, but has been farmed regeneratively for the last 30 years. And look at the color difference. This guy is putting carbon back into his soil. The guy on the left is continuing to lose it. And I'm going to show you this picture again, because did you notice this? Did you notice the color difference in the dust? 1935, look how black that was. We were not only losing soil, we were losing high carbon soil. Look at the color of the soil we're losing in 2014. We're still losing soil, but it doesn't have nearly as much carbon. So we've got a lot of problems. And I want to make this point. This is not just for farmers. This is not just a large-scale farmer problem. If you're a landowner, and I don't care if you just have a half-acre deer plot, this is your problem too. Because if you are planting seeds in the soil, you are a farmer. Doesn't that mean you have to be on a big scale, but this problem is for anyone. It's a societal problem, but the burden to fix this lies upon all of us as landowners, as land managers. So how do we solve this problem? Well, how did Houston solve the problem with Apollo 13? They had to identify the real issues. They had to identify the tools and the resources that they had available. They had to get the best minds available on solving the problem, and they had to be creative in their solutions. Now, they didn't have the luxury of time. They had those guys up there in a tin can floating around space. They had to get their problem solved pretty quickly. We have a little bit more time. But it's interesting that the problem that Houston was facing was a carbon problem. It was a CO2 problem. They had to figure out how to scrub the CO2 and get oxygen back for those guys to breathe. A lot of our problem, depending on who you ask, too much CO2 in the atmosphere? Well, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But we have this same issue and we have this same problem. And so what we need to do is we're going to go through these same processes to solve our problem. I think we know what the issues are. We're going to be looking today at a lot of the tools and resources that we have available to solve these. We've got some of the best minds involved in solving these problems. And you're going to hear from some of them here today about how they're solving these soil problems on their own operations. And you're going to see some pretty creative solutions as well. That's one thing that I've really, really enjoyed the last 15 years as we started the cover crop seed business, and we get to work with people really all over the world, is how creative farmers are at coming up with solutions. Now, some of them don't work. They're maybe just a little too creative and they don't work, but a lot of them do. And so it's fun to see the creativity in the farmer solutions. So what I want to talk to you about this morning is a concept that I call biograce, the 6 fundamental truths of biograce, or biological grace. And if you think about what true grace is, if we think about, the grace that we have been given, that God has given us through his son Jesus, true grace, it's free. You can't buy it. It's not available for sale. It's undeserved. You can't do anything to earn it, and it's unlimited. You're not going to run out. And the part that I get doesn't affect the part that you get. That's what true grace is. And I'm here to tell you that we have 6 things at our fingertips that fit perfectly into this category. They're free. You can't buy them. They're undeserved. You can't do anything to earn them. And we're not going to run out. So number 1, solar energy, sunlight, sunshine. It's limitless. It's free. The government hasn't figured out how to tax us on sunlight yet. They're probably talking about it somewhere. It's limitless, it's free, and plants are the best way to capture it, store it, and convert it into something of value. Okay? And so as farmers, as landowners, as land managers, really this is what we're all about right here. We are taking solar energy, it drives and powers the whole system, and through photosynthesis, this is the simplest but yet most important chemical formula in the whole world, CO2 plus H2O with the energy of the sun that we get by grace, because we can't buy sunlight. We didn't do anything to deserve it, and we're not going to run out. It's given by grace. That energy of the sun powers this system. With the chlorophyll cells in a plant, we can convert that to C6H12O6, which is glucose, a very simple, basic carbohydrate sugar that then becomes the basis of our entire food system, of our entire existence, and oxygen, which is handy to breathe, as a byproduct. And so when we are looking at how we want to run our operations, whether we're farming thousands of acres or whether we have a small food plot, this is the number 1 thing we should look at. Are we taking advantage of the solar energy that's made available to us? So if you're a corn bean guy, many farmers are, and that's all you do, you are taking advantage of, I'll be generous and say 50% of the solar energy that God has given you by grace. The other 50% is wasted. Now, we can't capture every photon that comes, because there's times when we're getting sunshine, like right now, that it's pretty cold. And so you say, well, Keith, we can't, nothing's going to grow when it's cold like this. Really? Is that true? Cereal rye. Cereal rye will germinate at 34 degrees. So if you come up to us or come back to my guys back at the booth and say, man, I'd really love to do something, but it's really too late. I missed my window. I'll try next year. We're going to say, can you get your drill in the ground? Plant cereal rye. It'll germinate in 34 degree soils, and at 38 degrees and the sun shining, it's going to be photosynthesizing. No other plant does that. That's why rye stays green all winter long, and we can capture sunlight every month of the year with cereal rye. So I think if you're saying that you missed your window and it's too late, may be just a bit of an excuse to get out of having to do something. Now, it's not just the farmers, food plotters. I know a lot of food plotters, a lot of land managers, that they're thinking, man, I'm going to get my plot ready to plant first part of August, so I have these big, lush, green-growing plants for my kill plot in October, November. Well, that's great, but what about the rest of the year? Are you just out there tilling it, spraying it, keeping anything from growing? If you do, you are wasting huge opportunities to capture that solar energy and turn it into energy that you can store in the soil. And so instead of just doing this in the spring and keeping it fallow, You need to plant a spring mix or a summer mix and have something growing out there all summer long. Because think about it. When's the longest day of the year? June 21st. When do a lot of people have their food plots fallow or just letting them grow up to weeds or something? May, June, July. The longest days of the year, the most sunlight that's available to you, and if you don't have something out there growing, you're just completely missing that opportunity and wasting it. So you can do a really beautiful, diverse mix like this and capture that solar energy and turn it into things of great value. Now, what can you turn it into? Well, that's number 2. That's our second biological grace, is carbon. Carbon is not a problem. In fact, I think carbon needs a new public relations agency because carbon's gotten a bad rap lately. You listen to the news and, we're all going to die because there's too much carbon in the atmosphere. Now, maybe there is. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know that. But what I do know is that the carbon does need to be in the soil in order for it to really be effective. And so regardless of what our problem with our erratic weather is, I think the solution is the same, and that's to get the carbon back into the soil. Carbon is not a problem. It's free food for both plants and biology. Photosynthesis again, CO2, that's plant food. So don't let anybody tell you it's a pollutant, it's going to kill us all. We would die without it. CO2 is plant food, and I'll show you in a little bit how it feeds all of the biology in your soil as well. But plants have this unique ability, nothing else can do this. It takes the CO2 out of the atmosphere, combines it with water, and turns it into the glucose and the oxygen that is the basis of all life. Now, you can't pay extra to get more atmosphere. The carbon is free. You didn't do anything to deserve it. It's just there. And we're not going to run out. In fact, we may get paid to take it. That'd be an even better deal, right? Here's how it works. Through photosynthesis, this plant, it's making that glucose sugar. But it doesn't all stay in the plant. As much as 50% of all of the carbon, of all of that glucose that plant makes through photosynthesis, half of it is never used by the plant to grow new roots or new shoots or seed pods or flowers or any of that. As much as 50% of that carbohydrate sugar is pumped out into the soil, and I got a really cool picture I'll show you next that demonstrates this. It's put into the soil through root exudates, and it's fed or sold or traded, however you want to think about it, to the soil biology, and in return, they have to deliver something back to the plant. They have to give that plant some services. They have to give it nutrients. They have to protect it. Because, and we were talking about this earlier, plants are actually, I call them smart. They're not really smart, but plants are so well designed for what they're doing. They're actually smarter than a lot of people I know, because if they're putting the carbon into the soil and they're not getting a return on that investment, they'll stop doing it. I know a lot of people that continue to invest in things that don't return, but that's a whole nother lecture, right? But plants will only do this if there's biology there. And if you don't have biology in your soil, then your plants just say, well, what's the point? And then you have less carbon going into your soil. So the poor soils get poorer, and the good soils get better. So you have to get this process started, and you do it by capturing that solar energy and turning it into carbon that can go into the soil. Here's that picture I was telling you about. This picture, so first of all, this is a cereal rye, cover crop cereal rye root, and all those little things you see coming off the side are root hairs. And what I want you to look at is all those little liquid droplets. Now this picture was not taken by some big shot scientist or something. This was taken by, many of you know Jimmy Emmons from Oklahoma. Jimmy took this picture with his iPhone, and he has a little proscope attachment that he puts right on the camera, and he can digitally magnify things. But the reason that this picture is so cool is because if I was to just pull that cereal rye plant up out of the ground, all those little root hairs would just fall off. They're very fragile. And if I was really careful and I dug it up and I dipped it in a bucket of water and I just gently washed all that soil off, I can preserve all the root hairs, and I can actually see all those little root hairs. But what happens to all those little liquid carbon droplets in the process of washing all the soil off? Well, obviously they're going to go away too. And so the reason that he was able to capture this picture is because this part of that cereal rye root was not growing in the soil. There was a worm channel, a worm burrow going up and down through the soil, and this cereal rye root was growing sideways through it. And so what you see here, and you can actually see soil kind of on either side of this, what you see here is about a 1/16 of an inch, the diameter of a worm burrow. And this cereal rye root was growing straight through there, and it was putting out these liquid carbon root exudates, even though there was no soil there, because there was soil so close on either side, that plant was pumping it out. And so think about this. This is a 1/16 of an inch. A cereal rye plant, and I don't know, I need to get a better number on this, but my estimate is a cereal rye plant will have 50 to 100 yards of a root system. Cereal rye is a massively rooted crop. Okay, not only does it germinate in 34-degree soils and photosynthesize at 38 and above, has a massive root system. So if we got a 1/16 of an inch and we multiply that up over across 50 yards of root system, and by the way, this plant, when Jimmy took this, because I asked him, I said, Jimmy, how big was that plant? Oh, he says, oh, you know how Jimmy talks, oh, you know, it's about 10 inches. It was not a huge plant. 10, 12 inches tall, but look at the amount of root exudate. So if you take a 1/16 of an inch and you multiply that up to 50 yards, we've got 1 million to 1.5 million plants per acre, times the number of droplets that are on this 1/16 of an inch. You start looking at billions and billions of little liquid carbon root droplets per acre from this one cover crop. So how do we fix our soils? Well, this is one way. Keep something growing out there, because when it grows, it's fixing and healing the soil. And when you have nothing growing, you're not fixing anything at all. So don't think that your cover crop has to get massively huge to do a lot of good things. Because a 10-inch tall cover crop like this, even if he would have terminated this the next day, he's already accomplished great things for his soil. Now, what can you do with this sort of thing? I don't want to steal all of Grant's thunder, but this is a picture of Grant's soil. And Grant will tell you, he's not farming soil, he's farming a mountain. He's all the soil he's got, he's had to make. But this is some of what he's made, and he's done it because he's got plants growing and he's capturing that solar energy and he's pumping massive amounts of carbon into the soil. And we can build soil really, really fast. It does not take thousands of years to make an inch of soil. And Grant's going to show you some great pictures. This is one of them. This is what happens when we can take advantage of these biological graces. Number 3, nitrogen is free and it's abundant. Now, we'll spend billions of dollars on nitrogen. We spend nothing on carbon. I don't know how well you can see this little tiny pink sliver at the top of this pie chart. So this is the makeup of our atmosphere. The little tiny pink sliver, carbon dioxide, it says 0.038, but it's probably closer to 0.04. 4/100ths of 1%, not 4%, not 0.4%, 4/100ths of 1% of our atmosphere is carbon. And this is why I say carbon's getting a bad rap. I don't think something at that low of concentrations can be blamed for all the things that they're blaming it for. But regardless of that, our plants are pulling carbon just fine out of that tiny little fraction. The big blue part, 78%, that's how much nitrogen is in our atmosphere. And yet we spend billions of dollars as an agricultural industry on nitrogen every year. We spend nothing on carbon. Well, what's the deal? Why is that? Well, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that we're not dead. Because if you've ever had a whiff of nitrogen, like from anhydrous, what does that do to you? And that'll literally melt you from the inside out. And if that nitrogen in the atmosphere was held as ammonia, well, there'd be no life on Earth as we know it. But Our atmospheric nitrogen is held as dinitrogen. It's two nitrogen molecules, and they're bonded to each other with 3 sets of covalent bonds. Very strong, very stable, and it makes it completely inert. So when I breathe in the atmosphere right now, I'm taking in a tremendous amount of nitrogen. It does absolutely nothing to my body because they're bonded to each other. They have no interest in connecting with anything else. I'm completely safe. The bad news is the plant's respiratory system is very similar to ours. When it's pulling in the atmosphere to get that tiny little amount of carbon out of the atmosphere, it's pulling in vast amounts of nitrogen. But because it's inert, plants can do nothing with it. They just have to spit it right back out. And so just as we can't do anything, or the nitrogen doesn't affect us, it doesn't affect plants as well. So what we have to do to make this nitrogen available for our plants is we have to pull those 2 nitrogen molecules apart, which takes vast amounts of energy, and you combine it with hydrogen and oxygen, and you can make ammonia and ammonium and nitrates and all these different things that now plants can use. And we can build these billion-dollar factories to do this, but it takes an incredible amount of energy. And when you're paying for nitrogen fertilizer, you're not paying for the nitrogen, because above every acre of crop ground in the world, there are 30,000 tons, not 30,000 pounds, but 30,000 tons of nitrogen above every acre of crop ground. It's free. You don't deserve it. You're not going to run out. It's given to us by grace. But plants were never designed to utilize that on its own. And what it takes billion-dollar factories to do, God gave us these tiny little microbes, these little bacteria called rhizobia, that can do the exact same things those factories are doing. They pull the nitrogen molecules apart, they combine it with hydrogen and oxygen, and they turn it into an available form of nitrogen for a plant, and they will trade it or sell it to the host plant in exchange for carbon. Because rhizobia can't live on nitrogen. They can make nitrogen, they can't live on it, they have to have the carbon. And the plants can make carbon, but they can't utilize the nitrogen. So it's kind of we could even say a match made in heaven of how they work together to do this. And so we have rhizobia that will fix nitrogen for these legume plants. Now there's other types of nitrogen fixers as well. I don't have pictures of it. We don't really have time in this talk. But there are a varied, azotobacter and azospirillum, and there's all kinds of other bacteria and organisms out there that do the same thing. They make atmospheric nitrogen available to plants in exchange for the plant giving them carbon to keep them alive. So, how can Grant grow that kind of soil? And he'll tell you he hasn't put any fertilizer on for many, many years. How is that possible? Because he's got 30,000 tons of nitrogen above every acre, and he's got the bacteria and the fungi and all of the other mycorrhiza out there that is making it available to his crops and to his plants. He's taking advantage of the grace that God has given him. All right, sunlight, carbon, nitrogen. Number 4, your soils are rich in minerals and plant nutrients. Now, I don't think there's any fertilizer dealers here, so you always got to be a little careful. But guys, we're way over fertilizing our soils because your soils are made up of the exact same things that you're buying in the fertilizer. But just like plants were never designed to get nitrogen out of the atmosphere, plants were never designed to pull those minerals directly out of the inorganic portion of the soil. That has to go through the bugs as well. I love this article in Scientific America. It says mycorrhiza fungi run the largest mining operation in the world. I love it because when you think of a mining operation, you think of this enormous, giant equipment, with tires the size of a house. But they're saying the largest mining operation in the world is happening at a level that unless you have a pretty powerful microscope, you'll never see it. That's cool. And so if you look at the picture on the right, this is a little tiny piece of feldspar. Just think of it as a little grain of sand. And so it's a part of the mineral portion of your soil, highly magnified. And those little brown channels or tunnels that are cut in there, those are actually little microscopic mine shafts. And mycorrhiza fungi can secrete the right enzymes and they actually cultivate the right types of bacteria that they can actually dissolve and liquefy solid rock, turn it into liquid minerals that plants can use, and deliver it right back to their host plant in exchange for carbon. Because as cool as this mycorrhiza is, and they can liquefy solid rock, they can't survive on that. Their food source has to be carbon. And so again, it's a symbiotic relationship. Here's what it looks like. This is a highly magnified plant root. I don't know if you can see the little the black circles in the plant right here and here, and even down in here. Those are what's called the arbuscles. That's kind of the nucleus or the headquarters of that fungus. It's actually growing inside the plant root, and then these little hyphae poke their way out through the plant root, and that's what goes out into the soil, and that's what's exploring. That's what's mining your minerals. That's what's bringing back water. If you want to really make your crops drought tolerant, don't go looking for different genetics. Go look for different biology, because mycorrhiza will make your crops extraordinarily drought tolerant. This is what it looks like. This is a kind of a drawing mock-up of a plant. You can see the main plant roots here and here and here, and those aren't touching much of the soil, but when it's highly colonized with mycorrhiza, now we can access all of the resources that your soil has to offer all around it. The mycorrhiza make this plant super efficient at capturing nutrients and water. And you don't have to buy those minerals. You don't have to buy them. They're free. And you didn't really deserve them, and you're not going to run out. Our soils have enough minerals in them to grow crops for tens of thousands of years, and particularly the way that Grant's doing it, where he's not hauling off truckloads of corn and soybeans. He could grow crops forever out there because he's cycling those nutrients back through the system year after year. All right, biological grace number 5. Soil biology makes the system bigger, faster, stronger, and more efficient. And we've been talking about this. I've been talking about the bacteria and the fungus and the mycorrhiza and all these different things. But the biology is what really makes the system work. And in our modern agriculture, and I say modern, probably, since the 40s, we've largely done things in our farming operations that have depressed and discouraged and killed off biology and not encouraged it and make it grow more. And as a result, we have to replace the biology with more and more inputs, fertility inputs, crop protection inputs. And we could be very productive doing that. We just can't be very profitable doing it. And so as food plotters, as land managers, you can get off that train of having to put on fertilizer and herbicides and fungicides and insecticides. And again, Grant's going to show you how he's done this on his own operation. And it's way easier to do when you're not hauling crops off, again, like a farmer would. But even them, we work with some of the best farmers in the world, and we've got guys that are growing completely organic crops, so no synthetic fertilizers, no herbicides, no insecticides, no fungicides, and doing absolutely zero tillage. They're completely organic, they're completely no-till, they're completely regenerative. They've eliminated all those inputs because they're taking advantage of the solar energy, the carbon, the nitrogen, the minerals, and the biology is tying it all together and making it work. Now, why can't we all do that? We ask ourselves that every day. It's hard. It's really hard to do these things, particularly in a large-scale farming operation where you are exporting a lot of things. And as Grant's going to tell you, it doesn't happen overnight either. It's a process. It's a system. You have to take steps to get there. But we are so glad that you're here because you can be encouraged to at least start taking those first steps towards making this system work for you. And number 6, water is essential for all life and processes. Okay, water is a key part of photosynthesis. Without water, photosynthesis doesn't work. Without water, life ceases to exist. You would argue, or you could, or you might argue with me that water is not unlimited. Remember the things of grace? It's free. You can't buy it. It's undeserved. You can't earn it. And it's unlimited. We're not going to run out of it. How can I say that when we're sitting here in the middle of a big drought? Well, it's not unlimited in the fact that we could just bring it up and get all we want unless, we have irrigation, then we can. But I'm not talking about irrigation. I'm talking about dry land farming here. It's unlimited in the sense that you can't destroy or get rid of water. You can change its state, you can send it somewhere else, but the water that we have in the system is unlimited and it cycles. The water cycle is unlimited, and a lot of the things that we do discourage the rain from falling on our ground. We've got an article in our Soil Health Resource Guide back there about, I think it's called Everybody Complains About the Weather, but Nobody Ever Does Anything with it about it. But it talks about how the way that we farm is discouraging rainfall from falling in a lot of our areas. And it talks a lot about Alejandro down in the Chihuahua Desert in Mexico. And in our next guide that's going to be coming out in January, we've got an expanded version of that article written by Alejandro himself. And they've got documented proof showing how they've got rain clouds forming over their regenerative ranch, and their neighbors a couple miles away get nothing. And they can see it on the radar, and they can see it in the sky. So we're doing things that can either encourage or discourage water. But one of the main points that I want to make is when we think about the water cycle, all of these things are happening. Now, you can't control how much it rains, although you can do some things that influence it, like I was talking about, but you really don't have a lot of levers to pull to make it rain when you want it to. But there are parts of this that you have complete control over, primarily the amount of infiltration. And I'm here to tell you that, you better not be complaining to God about not getting enough rainfall if you're not taking advantage of what He's already sending you by capturing and storing every drop you get. I was out in California at a conference a few years ago, and I overheard a group of old boys talking, and I was kind of surprised. They're dry out there, so I shouldn't be surprised. But the common question when it rains around here, one farmer to another, how much rain did you get? How much rain did you get? And this guy's answer was precious. Without missing a beat, he just said, all of it. I got all of it. And I thought, what an awesome answer. That's the only answer we should ever give. I got all of it. Because if you get a 2-inch rain, but half of it runs off, you're lying if you tell people you got 2 inches of rain. You got an inch of rain, the reservoirs, the rivers, got the other inch, along with sediment and other pollutants. So you can talk to our friends over here at Kansas Wraps. They've got some great programs to help you increase that infiltration, to prevent some of that runoff. But if you don't do everything that you can to capture the rainfall that you get, you're really missing part of the picture. So I can say that water is unlimited in the fact that it cycles through the system. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have with our erratic weather, with global warming, climate change, whatever you want to call it, I don't think carbon is the problem the way people think it is. But when you can't get rid of water, and we have half the carbon in our soils, and carbon is directly related to how much water we can store in our soil, we're no longer storing the water in our soils that we used to because we don't have the carbon. Where'd that water go? Well, there may be some more in oceans and reservoirs and things like that, but folks, a lot of it is floating around in the atmosphere as water vapor. And water vapor is a far more potent greenhouse gas than CO2 is. And so I think a lot of our crazy erratic weather, and again, that article talks about this, is because we've got so much water vapor in the air, but it's so difficult for it to condense into rainfall so that we get less frequent rainfall events, but when they come, they're much more intense. Because when it does rain, there's all this water vapor that comes. So regardless of what that problem is, the solution is to get the carbon back into the soil. Because if we get the carbon into the soil, we'll hold more water in the soil, and there'll be less water in the atmosphere. And then the water does essentially become unlimited, at least in the sense of how you're utilizing it and cycling it. We were at Grant's place. Grant put on a field day back in March, and we went and we brought some infiltration rings. This is at one of Grant's food plots here. We pound these rings into the ground, 6-inch diameter. You dump a bottle of water in, you time it to see how long it takes for the water to disappear. And that was fascinating, Grant. I thought that was just really interesting. We had them set up in different places, some in high traffic areas, some where there was just some monoculture grass growing, and then in his plots. And there was a lot of variability in how fast that water disappeared. So some of it, that first inch, went away in like 6.5 seconds. Really impressive. In other areas, it took minutes. And for the second inch and the third inch, there were places that third inch, I don't know, we were out there for probably half an hour, that third inch was still in the ring. And that was where there was a monoculture, just grass growing, and not these diverse mixes. So infiltration is something really easy for you to test yourself, and it's something that we can change. We have complete control over it with the management practices that we do. All right, so those are the 6 biological graces that have been given to us. But here's the thing about grace. It does you no good if you don't grasp it and accept it. You know, what God has done for you does you no good if you don't accept that. And these biological graces, the sunlight, the carbon, the nitrogen, the minerals, the biology, and the water, they do you no good if you don't do something to implement them and integrate them into your system. You can't just say, well, we've got all the sunlight and carbon and nitrogen that we want. If you're not doing something to take advantage of that and integrate it into your system of farming, of food plotting, of land management, it does you absolutely no good. So the way that we do this, and I'm setting the stage for Grant and for Darren, for Steve that are going to come up later, they're going to show you more of the practical aspects of what they're doing and how they're doing this. But the way that we implement these biological graces into our system is through the soil health principles. And I know that you've all heard these, so I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, and then, like I say, these other guys who are way smarter than me are going to show you how it's actually done. I'm telling you the theory, they're going to give you the practical. Soil health principle number 1, keep the soil covered. And I list the different biological truths, the biograce truths that apply directly to this. You know, when you keep the soil covered, you're going to capture that solar energy, and you're going to increase your biology, and you're going to increase your water storage. Folks, if you can't keep your soil covered, it really doesn't matter what else you do. It's probably going to wash away. It's probably going to blow away. It's going to get too hot. It's going to get too cold. Bad things happen to bare soil. And we have way too much bare soil in this country. So that's the first thing that I encourage people to do, is figure out what you can change within your system to keep your soil covered more often. And that should be your goal. Our goal on our farm is we walk out to our fields, I never want to see my soil unless I go looking for it. We don't always accomplish that. We've got bare soil this year. It didn't rain. Couldn't grow much. So it doesn't always work the way we want it to, but at least that's still our goal, is to try to keep that soil covered. Number 2, minimize disturbance. And when I'm talking about disturbance, the easiest thing to think about is tillage. Well, okay, I'll just stop disking. Well, that's a good start. Good start. Mechanical disturbance is hugely negative to your soil biology and to your soil cover. You've got to stop tillage in order to make this work. But the other thing that people don't often think about, herbicides, synthetic fertilizers, all these pesticides, all of these chemicals are huge biological disturbances in your soil. And we need to minimize this. Now notice, it does not say eliminate, because tillage, fertilizers, herbicides, they're all tools. And there are going to be times when you need to use those tools for what you want to accomplish. And so we need to have those in our toolbox, but folks, every time you bring one of those tools out and use it, it costs you money. And it costs your soil some of its health. So only use those tools when absolutely necessary. Minimize that disturbance as much as possible. You know, use no-till equipment. Use roller crimpers to terminate versus chemicals. and the system will really grow and drive itself forward. Principle number 3, maximize the amount of diversity that you have out there in your system. This is going to hit all 6 of these biological graces. When we have diversity of plants, diversity of roots, diversity of root exudates, diversity of biology, the system really comes together and starts working. And why, as a food plotter, would you go out and plant soybeans by themselves, or sorghum by itself, or radishes by themselves, when you're not trying to mechanically harvest any of this? It's the perfect opportunity to plant a diverse mix. There's so much power that comes into the system through diversity. You're really wasting opportunities when you don't plant a diverse mix when you have the opportunity. Now, that doesn't mean you should plant 50 things just willy-nilly. They need to be the right things, and they need to be selected and chosen with care, and they need to be things that are appropriate to the season and to the context of what you're doing. But go through the effort to figure out what those things are and get them out there when they belong. Principle number 4, living roots as often as possible. Again, if you don't have a green plant growing, you're wasting your sunlight, you're wasting the opportunity to put carbon into your soil, you're wasting the opportunity for your biology to get nitrogen into the soil. You're just wasting lots of opportunities. Now, it says whenever possible because, if it doesn't rain, you can't. And if you're in an area where it gets super cold, there's going to be times when nothing is necessarily living and growing, but as often as possible, have those living roots. Number 5, integrate properly managed livestock. I had to get livestock for this audience in here, okay? Livestock brings so much biology to the system. It helps cycle all of these things. It makes such a difference in how quickly you can make the system work. It's really important that you get them in there as well. Soil is going to be created at the intersection of plants, biology, water, carbon, nitrogen, and other minerals. And Grant's going to show you how that process works. He's going to be coming up here in just a couple of minutes. And he's going to show you firsthand how he's created beautiful, rich, deep, dark soil on the proving grounds there. And when our friends from Ward Labs talk, they've been down there. I was telling them about it. Patrick, I don't think you believed me when I was telling you about what Grant has grown on top of the Ozark rocks, but I know you were impressed as well. It's weird because you can hardly get a soil probe in the ground because there's so many stinking rocks around, but when you do get it pulled up, it's some pretty decent soil. So we're going to talk more about how we create soil by taking advantage of these graces that God has given us. So Apollo 13, they brought them home. They solved the problems. They got those guys home. It's an incredible story of rescue. Actually, a much greater story than if they'd have gone to the moon and back and had no issues. Because it shows how we can solve problems when we put our best people on it and we understand the resources that we have to work with and we get creative in our solutions. And guys, we can do this too. We've got a lot of problems in agriculture. Don't kid yourself. But we have the ability to solve them when we take advantage of these graces that are free, they're undeserved, and they're unlimited. The sunlight, the carbon, the nitrogen, the minerals, the biology, and the water. When we put all these into our system in the right place, through these principles of soil health, we will build our soils really quickly. And when we start doing that at scale, we'll change things on a global level really quickly as well. So there's a lot of doomsday sayers out there about the environment, the climate, and all these things. The solution is really relatively simple. We just need to start putting it into practice across a large area. We have copies of this 8th edition Soil Health Resource Guide. You're free to take those. All of our old editions are available on our website. They're free to download. You can go right to our website and download those. We will be coming out with the 9th edition sometime here shortly after the first of the year. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it very much.